We are going to go ahead and get started. All right, so this is our budget hearing for the 23rd, May 23rd. Dr. Thomas, if you would go ahead, I'm going to call the meeting to order, I should say, at 6:06 p.m. Dr. Thomas, if you would go ahead and call the roll for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis? Ms. Gallagher? Here. Mrs. Davis? Dr. Yeager?
Here.
Dr. Dykeman?
Here.
Dr. Anderson?
Here.
Dr. Gant?
Here.
Attorney Hull?
Here.
And Dr. Maddox?
Here.
All right, thank you. So we do have a quorum. We are going to move to item 2, and this is to amend and/or adopt the agenda. The floor is open.
I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Hall, a second by Dr. Maddox. Any follow-up questions or comments? All right, all in favor of adopting the agenda before us, if you would raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. We are going to move forward then to our budget presentation, and that is item 3. Actually, items 3 is the budget presentation, and then item 4, the millage rate hearing. Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schooneman.
Yes, Mr. Schooneman is going to provide us just with a brief budget overview since you all have gone through the budget presentation several times. And so he will do a budget overview and then our millage rate hearing. And then we will see if we've had any community members to come for public comment.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. First off, thank you for coming tonight. Definitely appreciate it. This is the second budget presentation, the kind of like the more formal budget presentation and millage rate hearing. And just a reminder, these are required by the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and the goal of these presentations and hearings are to provide any kind of community members or concerned citizens the ability to come forward and express their concern or thoughts about this budget and millage rate. Last time we had one gentleman. Tonight it doesn't look like we have any at this point, but it's kind of on par with previous years. But overall, thank you for your participation. This helps us kind of check all of those required boxes and make sure that we are complying legally with the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So rather than going through the 40-something pages of slides like we did at the last presentation, I thought we would just stick to the more condensed budget document. Starting up at the top, the estimated beginning fund balance for the year, $49 million. So this is this is about 25% greater than the beginning of this fiscal year. It's definitely a healthy benchmark, or it's a healthy place to be. Our benchmark of 15%. You know, we're looking at throughout the year. You know, we always monitor that trend of where our fund balance is, and starting out at $49 million, you know, we'll be at least $7 million over that benchmark throughout the year. So we do have some wiggle room and some safety net if we do need to rely on it. Our revenues, right now, we're predicting $189 million, just a little bit north of $189 million. And there are 3 main components to our revenue. The first is property taxes. Although the property tax digest grew at 18.2%, we're looking at rolling back the millage rate a little bit, 1.2 mils at 18.8 mils. The second part that is significant in terms of our revenues by source is the state QBE. Even though our FTE counts, our student counts are staying almost exactly the same, we're going to receive more money through QBE, and that's due to a couple things. One is the $2,000 increases for each earned position that we have. There's also the TRS portion of everybody's salaries that's covered as part of the QBE formula has increased slightly. Also, there's no austerity next year, so that's the first time in a few years where there's going to be no austerity, and I think the third year in the past decade where there's not going to be any austerity. So the funding formula is going to be considered fully funded for next year. Looking at it by source, the only other one I didn't cover is kind of that other bucket. And we have projected $11.475 million there. So just looking at it, how it stacks up, the QBE is going to represent about 38% of our budgeted revenues. Our local property tax is about 56%, and the other category is about 6%. Moving on to our expenditures, we're anticipating the exact amount of money going out the door as coming in the door, so it is a balanced budget. So we're looking at spending $189,130,354, same exact amount as we're bringing in. When you're looking at it by function, 63% of it is soaked up by instruction. The state benchmark that used to be tested by auditors on an annual basis was 65%, but as a charter district, that's one of the things that we have waived. So I guess from an auditor background and a chief financial officer's perspective, I would like to see that a little bit more than 65%, than, north of 63, probably closer to 65. But once again, that is something that we have waived as a district. So broken down by object, 85% of this budget is salaries and benefits. That's right on par, maybe a little bit higher than where it was last year. But those salary and benefits pays for 9 board members, 1,324 certified employees, and 767 classified employees. The other part of those expenditures, we've got 14%, which is all of our operating expenditures, and then 1%, which is transfer outs to other funds. We make transfer out to cover the remaining portion of ROTC, those better everyday grants. It gets transferred into Funds 121 and Fund 122. And then also for the last 3 years, or I guess this will be the 3rd year, we have equalized the pre-K salaries. So each year what we do is just move money out of our general fund over into either 560 or 561 to help support that. So our ending fund balance, we're predicting to be right at the same spot that we're going to start the fiscal year at $49 million. Once again, this is a balanced budget. I've included the links to the overall, all the slides in that budget presentation. I've also included the link to the budget dashboard. And just a reminder, in that budget dashboard, you can drill down by any cost center. You can see how much is allocated for each cost center. You can also look at all of the positions, so you can see where the difference is. If you want to know, how many people there are in business services budgeted from one year to the next, you can always go in and do that comparison and contrasting yourself. Okay, can slide on down. This is just the more formal document. It lists the revenues by source. It's categorized up there with your local sources, your state sources, and your other category down there at the bottom. And then here's our expenditures by function. Keep on going down. This next document, we did have one of our questions at Villa about where can I find, how much do we spend or how much do we plan on spending within each cost center or each location, and I pointed them into this document from last year because I think it does a really good job of breaking it down not only by cost center, but then you can also see the functional category for each line item in the budget. And depending on which district you go to, you may see a budget that's similar to this where it's by cost center, or it might just be summarized by function. From an accountant's background, I would look at it more by function, but I could see how it'd be much more useful to the user to have it by cost center. So this document kind of gives you the whole picture. And then finally, if you're curious how any of the revenues or any of the expenditures stack up year to year, this final page in this document shows the differences in revenue by line item as well as expenditures. And just the one thing I wanted to point out, the total expenditures down there at the bottom, it is increasing from $177.6 million up to $189 million. And the vast majority of that, all but about $400,000, is made up of our salary and benefit changes. And from one year to the next, that's a 6.5% increase in our overall budget. So I'll pause there, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to field those to the best I can.
I have one.
Sure.
Can you articulate what are we spending money on more than others that makes us 63 versus 65% instruction? Is that all the extra social and emotional learning supports that we're putting money towards relative to instruction costs, or is there another explanation?
I would say a lot of it does have to do with support services and the amount that we invest in support services. It also has to do with the amount, the salary and benefit cost. I mean, if we're looking at what's the overall budget, 85% of it goes to salaries and benefits. If we are paying those classified workers a higher rate than surrounding districts, just overall weight, the weights are going to be less towards instruction and a little bit more towards, those other support categories. For instance, janitorial staff. In my last district, we paid a separate staffing agency to do that. And one of the reasons behind that is it was a fiscally conservative, responsible thing to do. And we could pay an external agency an amount per hour or an amount per square foot that was less than we could do it for ourselves. Well, in Clark County, our priorities historically have been much different. And so the amount that we pay per square foot or per employee is greater than that district. That's just a priority of the board. So I would say it's not just one thing. That's just one thing that comes to mind. But overall, it does have to do a lot with our compensation structure, our support services, and our overall values leading into this next fiscal year.
So one concern I've heard is that you just have more administrative staff relative to teaching staff. And is that possibly an explanation as well, or not?
It just depends on how their salary is coded. A lot of the administrative staff, we would have to see, are they coded to instruction? Are they coded,
Right. Okay.
if we scroll back up and you see all the different functional categories,
Right.
without looking at any one in particular, it would be hard to know. I mean, we can't just make a blanket statement that everybody that works in this building is categorized to one functional category. It'd be easier to look by cost center in order to do that.
Okay.
But I couldn't give you an answer one way or the other intelligently on that without kind of doing a little bit more research.
I think the motivation is to just understand we're asking for waivers for a state standard of 65%, and we're getting it because we're a chartered system. But the why we're getting it would be nice to kind of be able to say, well, that's because we're doing this really important thing to be more innovative and to get more student achievement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just being able to, for me to be able to articulate to our stakeholders, why are we getting this waiver and why are we doing this, it would be nice to know, so.
I mean, the other thing to look at, it's probably a trend throughout the state where you've got external pressures, fuel, for instance. That's something that's completely out of our control, the cost of fuel, fluctuating on a day-to-day basis. And if one year we can get by with budgeting $800,000 for fuel, and the next year we got to budget $1.5 million for fuel, that's going to kind of skew those figures. So I would imagine leading into this next year where people are budgeting more for fuel, it's going to take away from that 65% threshold as well. Okay, if there's no more questions, Dr. Thomas, we can flip on over to the millage rate presentation.
Could I ask one question before you move on? I'm sorry. I was trying to structure my thought. So the 6.5% increase in the FY '23 budget being primarily the result of salary and fringe, is it typically around that range of about 6 or 7% increase every year?
It's going to vary year to year. I think this year is increasing more because of our salary and benefit changes in comparison to previous years. Maybe previous years there was more growth in certain areas of the operating budget. This year, it just so happens, we're making the $2,000 per employee permanent that we had this year. So we're building that into the salary structure, as well as giving that 3% COLA, as well as adjusting all of the salary schedules and bringing up anyone that made below $12.50 an hour up to at least $13 an hour. So combined, compared to previous budgets, it's probably a little bit more heavy on the salary and benefit increase side than we've seen in previous budgets. Okay. All right, now moving on to the millage rate hearings. This is the second of 3 required meetings that we have to discuss and present the millage rate hearings. We only have to present the budget twice. So tonight's presentation is the last time we'll have to actually formally present the budget. After tonight, the only thing we're going to have to do is before the board meeting on June 2nd at 5 is just do this short presentation of the millage rate hearing, and it might take 5 minutes, and then give anyone else that is concerned about the mills that are going to be assessed an opportunity to speak. But we're kind of on the back end of it now, and you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I guess we'll just push on. Okay, tentative millage rate. For FY '23, it was set at the last board meeting at 18.8 mils on May 12th. This is actually a decrease from the historical millage rate of 20 mils in FY '22, and for at least the last 20 years, it has been set at 20 mils. So this is the first time in at least 20 years it has decreased anywhere below 20 mils. It's based off of reassessment of properties. Let me start over. So the reassessment of properties produced a property tax increase of 10.8%. with the millage rate at 18.8%. So we had said the tax digest grew at 18.3%. So if we had a millage rate stay consistent at 20 mils, the overall tax increase would have been much closer to 18%. Since we're rolling it back some, instead of having an 18% tax increase, we're looking at a 10.08% tax increase. In order to have no increase at all, we would have had to roll back that millage rate even further to 17.078 mils. And so our difference there between 18.8 and that 17.078, the rollback rate is 1.722 mils. So that kind of represents the tax increase that we were assessing for FY '23 is just that 1.722 mils. Just the nature of property values. Some property owners will see an increase and some will not. Some will see a greater increase than others. We've kind of polled those who have wanted to share what their reassessment notices had said, and I actually just got mine in the mail today, so that was the first thing I did is calculate it and see what the increase is. But I know it's ranged from 9%, 13%, and I know someone had a 30% increase, so it just ranges from house to house, the difference in value. And so that 10.08% increase is just an average across the board. And so just by nature of it, some homeowners will see a larger increase than others. It's just depends on the reassessment of your home value. Excuse me. Here's our overall tax digest. It's the taxable portion of the tax digest. grew from 4.9 billion up to 5.8 billion. You can go to the next slide. That increase is made up of, the vast majority of it is reassessment of existing property. So we're looking at a 15.9% increase. That's just due to the reassessment. We have had some growth in the county, not much. That overall growth was 2.4%. But when you add those two together, 18.3% increase year after year. I would like to point out the value of 1 mil and just how much it's grown in the last 5 years. 2017, 1 mil brought in $3.7 million. Projected for next year, 1 mil will bring in $5.8 million. So what that's allowed us to do, that growth, is actually roll back the millage rate from 20 to 18.8. When we roll it back, the estimated school tax is $108.9 million. Just keep in mind that $108.9 million doesn't take into consideration any kind of delinquent payments or the 2.5% that the tax commissioner holds on to. This was published in the paper. This is our 5-year history. And you can see there the rate. It has been 20 mils consistent, 2017 all the way through 2021, set at 18.8. The increase down there at the bottom, it does say 11.12%, but that takes into consideration not only the reassessment, but also the new growth. When you're looking at the notifications that are required for the taxpayer bill of rights, it's only off the reassessment portion, not the whole thing. So that's why the 11.12% is a little bit higher than that 10.08%. And so finally, unless there's any other questions, this would have been the portion of the presentation where if anyone had signed up or wanted to come up and kind of let you know what they think about the millage rate, this would have been the time for them to come up and do so. But since we don't have anybody, unless there's any other questions, we can all go home a little early tonight.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will move to item 5, which is adjournment. Floor is open.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Hall, second by Dr. Maddox. We are adjourned at 6:28 p.m. Thank you.